Welcome to Climate Quickies, bite-sized nuggets of climate goodness from our TEDxLondon experts in under 5 minutes.
In this week's Climate Curious, recorded live at TED, we're asking a psychology professor how we can make climate action feel happy instead of miserable. To take us through her ideas is Jiaying Zhao, the person who invented feng shui for your fridge and the term behavioural sustainability. Let's hear more from Jiaying. Stay curious.
Okay, so we're back at TED in Vancouver, and I am super, super excited with our guest today. We've been wanting to speak to her for a while. I'm joined today by Dr. Jiaying Zhao. She's an associate professor at the Department of Psychology, and this is a long one, people, just keep listening, and the Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia. She's a Canada Research Chair in Behavioural Sustainability, and then you know what, the rest of this is going to be in the notes. So there we go. You're at UBC, you do this awesome research on behavioural sustainability. First of all, just tell us, what is that? Like, what does your research actually do?
Behavioral sustainability is a term I invented.
Oh, nice. Okay, this is why I don't know it.
It's fantastic. A new term. Basically, what I do is I try to change people's behaviors for sustainability.
Okay.
That could mean to fight climate change, to reduce waste, to conserve biodiversity, or actually to increase financial well-being. So that's my other arm, which is reduce poverty.
Reduce poverty. Incredible. So first of all, you have a TED Talk. Mm-hmm. Which I think everyone should go watch. But if people haven't watched it yet, can you give me like a 1 minute primer for people to understand like kind of the perspective you're coming from in your work?
Yeah. So my TED Talk is called How to Feng Shui Your Fridge.
Brilliant.
The gist is that we should take climate actions that not only reduce emissions, but also increase our own happiness at the same time. Okay. That's what it is.
Right. So say it again, because I think that this is going to be something people haven't heard. We need to take climate actions
that increase our own happiness at the same time.
Oh.
Happiness.
Right. This is not something we often hear in the climate space. Tell me, how did you get here?
Okay, so, the climate action is surrounded by guilt, shame, terror, anxiety, depression, anger.
Yes, right? I identify with all these feelings.
These are the negative emotions we associate with climate change and climate action. And Liz Dunn, who's a happiness researcher, she's the #1 happiness expert in the world.
Also great
TED Talk. She's my colleague at UBC. So she basically asked me, can we make climate action feel happy instead of miserable? Can we actually switch the emotions and let happiness get on stage along with these negative emotions, almost like Inside Out, the movie.
Yes.
But maybe happiness is a key to climate action.
Okay, first of all, any reference to Inside Out, I'm on board. It's like the best movie. Well, that's a really interesting question, to bring happiness into this work. I know that you've done a lot of research. A lot of the research you've done is stuff that I think about, I've read, I cite in the work that I do. Can you tell us a bit about some of, I guess, the most recent, but the most profound findings you've had, and the most profound findings you've had and what you've kind of surfaced in your research?
Of course. A paper I was involved in, along with over hundreds of authors, was published last year. We tried a number of interventions to change people's belief about climate change, to increase climate action in 63 countries. This is led by researchers in NYU. And what we found was the doom and gloom message, the typical narrative around climate change, increased people's sharing behavior on the social media. People are more likely to share that bad, horrible news.
Right, and that's the stuff that we see our friends sharing.
That's right. But it actually decreased climate action.
Right.
So there's a backfiring effect with these negative gloom and doom news. So this is evidence that we need to change the narrative. We need to maybe introduce something positive instead. Another study I just wrapped up, was to show that when it comes to climate communication, the decarbonization, net zero, zero waste, all of that
all the buzzwords.
reduction words are actually counterproductive.
Okay, so specifically the words that have to do with something decreasing, the reduction.
Reduce, right?
Okay.
Like that's the number one thing. Reduce emissions, cut emissions. We need to get down to zero. Those are not very encouraging frames. And
Right.
we've shown that in an experiment, in a scientific experiment, that those frames, those reduction-oriented frames, actually make people less likely to act.
Right.
The alternative is a positive frame.
Okay.
So instead of net zero or decarbonization, we should emphasize the desirable things people should do instead. So accelerate green energy growth,
Okay.
right? Instead of saying zero waste, we should say extend the longevity of your stuff.
Okay.
Reuse, use it more.
So does something like 100% renewable energy, does that do better than
That's
zero?
way better.
Than zero.
More renewables is better than net zero.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's because in our brains and the way that we process this information, we associate less and decreasing with negative.
It's negative, right? It's like it's not the most encouraging frame.
Okay.
So it's almost like telling a kid, stop doing that.
Right. Right.
Okay. One, most likely it's going to backfire. The kid is going to do that more. Two is it doesn't tell us what we should do instead.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So when you say net zero or decarbonize, I'm like, okay, so what should I do instead?
Okay.
It has nothing. It says nothing about the thing we should be doing.
Okay. How interesting, because what it's doing is taking away something and replacing it with a void.
Exactly. That's exactly the problem.
Okay. This is, I think, really interesting because there's a lot of people who will be listening who are starting to talk more to their friends, to their family about climate. And they'll definitely, I mean, I know that this, just thinking about this personally, you know, as I started to learn more about climate change and do this work, you hear all the ways that people frame it and you just adopt that way. And then when you're talking to, you know, friends and family, it can feel really frustrating to feel like, why don't you care? Why wasn't this getting through to you the way that it's getting through to me?
Right. I mean, the typical reaction is anger, resentment, right?
Yeah.
Those are the divisive emotions.
Yes.
That don't bring us together, that further polarize us, divide us. It's counterproductive. My quest is stop doing that.
Right. But in terms of the shareability, the first finding that you talked about, how fear-based narratives are more shareable, but they decrease action. I don't know if this is where your research went, but then how do you create something that's both shareable and increases action? I mean, that's the holy grail, right?
One idea,
Right.
which we haven't done, I think it's a brilliant idea that somebody needs to test this, is use humor.
Okay.
Use fun.
Yes.
Humor, fun things get spread out. Like they spread more. This is true. Right? So why don't we make it fun? And that's part of the happiness argument. I'm actually running several experiments to turn environmental behaviors fun, to make things that we think are, you know, troubling or effortful, make them fun.
Okay.
And I think that will get more sharing, that will get more attention and more adoption.
Brilliant. So we definitely want you to come back and tell us about what you find in that research. Was there something that in your research that surprised you when you went into it? Was there something that really stood out?
There's a lot.
I'm sure.
So in my TED Talk, I mentioned instead of saying drive less, that's another reduction message, we should say drive more people. Because you want to carpool, you want to increase the social connection with others. It's basically turn your car into like Uber or car sharing service. That was one of our messages. We tested that. We tested every single message in my TED Talk in an experiment. And we just wrapped up those experiments. It turns out for people in North America, they really hate driving more people.
Okay.
They rather prefer drive less.
Oh, interesting.
So for that action, that was a surprise.
Okay.
I would say, drive less, period. Because driving more people is just, it's not very attractive. It does not sound good. So I'm like, okay, that didn't work. That was a surprise.
Right.
But most other messages I put out there in my talk worked. Right. So eat more plants as opposed to eat less meat. Okay. That's a great one. So the other surprise I will mention is that this fun, happiness-oriented message works the best for conservatives.
I want everyone listening who has like that one person in their family or friends group who just is like rolls your eyes every time you talk about climate. I want you to all do an experiment and try this alternative messaging, and then in the comments tell us if it worked.
Yeah.
But it
In
takes
fact-
practice, right?
Oh, of course. Now, what else should you say instead?
Right.
My suggestion is maybe don't even mention climate.
Right.
Don't. Just say, if you want to be happier and healthier and feel better, do these things.
Thank you so much for sharing this. We will have you back,
Oh, I'll come back.
hopefully, and we will all be happier.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Thanks for listening to this quickie.
This episode was created by our superstar podcast team at TEDxLondon. Until next time.
Stay curious.